The last few years have been so hard for so many. I know from personal experience that women in healthcare have had some particular challenges. I'm Dr. Erica Werner, chair of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at Tufts Medical Center. With the COVID pandemic, we've worried about keeping our children, parents, partners, and communities safe. And if you work in healthcare, our worries extend to those we care for every day, our patients and coworkers. With hospitals and medical offices packed with people in need of medical services and resources so constrained, it's no wonder burnout is prevalent. If you are feeling stressed, you are not alone. Tufts Medicine is proud to partner with the Boston Globe to present this special webinar, Women Leaders in Healthcare, Taking Care of Patients, Employees, and Yourself. Together, we'll examine ways to curb stress so you can focus on what's important and doing the work you love.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to our panel. I'm Anna Kuchman, Health and Biotech Editor at the Boston Globe. I'm pleased to be joined today by an outstanding panel of women leaders for our discussion. Let me introduce them to you now. I'd like to welcome Dr. Vanessa Brito, Associate Vice President for Campus Life and Executive Director of Health and Wellness at Brown University. Hi, Dr. Brito, welcome.
Thank you, Anna.
We also have Dr. Bisola Ojikutu, Commissioner of Public Health for the City of Boston. Dr. Ojikutu, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anna.
And we have Allison Watson, Founder and CEO of Modern Health. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to join us today. I know you're incredibly busy during this pandemic. Let me start by asking each of you to talk about the impact that the pandemic has had on the mental health of your employees and on the patients or clients you serve. Dr. Ojikudu, let me start with you if that's okay.
Great, thank you. I think it's such an important discussion that we're having. I think these are all challenges that all of us are facing. In addition to leading our city's health department, I'm also an infectious disease physician, so sort of being involved in direct patient care as well as leading a large organization, and we have about 1,300 staff members at the public health department. So I guess I would say having my feet in both worlds, both public health workers and those in healthcare have been and continue to be the foundation of the COVID-19 response. And both groups of workers have been under enormous pressure and strain throughout the pandemic. And even though we're not at the height of the pandemic anymore, many continue to be exhausted, largely because this has just gone on for so long. Right now, attrition is extremely high within public health departments across the country, as well as here in Boston. The percentage of openings at our public health department has tripled since COVID began. I think in particular with the public health workforce, there are unique challenges because we've severely underfunded public health work throughout the country. All those mass vaccination clinics that you saw, the testing sites, the surveillance, all the masking guidance. I mean, this is all coming from the public health department that is really woefully underfunded and underinvested in. So just a particular strain. I would also just say to just specifically talk about mental health issues, there have been a number of really large surveys looking at the public health workforce as well as healthcare workers. And, a couple of them have really shed light on the fact that PTSD and depression are just extraordinarily common within the healthcare workforce, but also anxiety, just this idea of waiting pins and needles for the next variant, the next surge, what's going to happen next. I think that's really sort of keeping people, on edge, in addition to this overwhelming exhaustion. So obviously some mental health challenges require intervention, clinical intervention, and are concerning on that level. But at the same time, we definitely need to make significant improvements within our workplace to address some of these challenging issues. And I'll stop there, but I just emphasize that there's so many things that we can do, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about it during this session.
That's great, thank you. Dr. Brito, let me go to you next. What are you and your colleagues and students experiencing at Brown?
Thank you, Anna. I also very much appreciate the question. I am a general internist and like my colleague have the opportunity to work with a large team of people. I oversee our health services area, our counseling services, emergency medical services, our Be Well Health Promotion team, as well as accessibility services. And that group is about 200 people, and all of them have certainly been working tirelessly over the last 2 years as we've all done our best to get our arms around managing COVID. I would say that the pandemic was hugely impactful on the mental health of students in particular. And higher ed in general was certainly no exception to that. One of the most challenging aspects of the pandemic, I would say, was the exacerbation of things like isolation and disconnection and feelings of loneliness. And that really, I think, played out in situations, particularly for students, whether or not people had underlying mental health issues. These feelings emerged and played a significant role in how students experienced their education. And so knowing some of these variables were in motion, it was very important for us, and still is very important for us, to think about how we're engaging with students, how we're reaching out, and how we're being innovative in those engagements. For example, those students who were in isolation, we had to be very intentional about how we supported them, how we wrapped services around them. We were intentional and preemptive about connecting with them before there was a problem, to say, here are the resources, here's how we can be helpful. You don't have to have a problem, you don't have to feel in crisis for us to connect with you. And so giving people permission to access services and resources without necessarily, quote unquote, having a reason was very important. We engaged the community in a public health education campaign called Brown Takes Care, to just really emphasize this idea of building and maintaining a community to mitigate some of the feelings of loneliness and isolation that people were experiencing. And we wanted students to tell their stories. We used that virtual space in ways, we tried to be innovative in various ways. And we wanted students to tell their stories, to connect with each other and communicate with each other. We found that to be really, really helpful. In fact, the feelings were normal. They weren't necessarily pathologic, and we wanted people to understand that we were here to help them kind of reshape and think about this new perspective that we all had to have, and gave them an opportunity to really understand that we were here for them, to support them.
Thank you so much. Allison, can you talk a little bit about your experiences and those of your colleagues?
Yeah, for sure. So super excited to be here. Thanks again for having me. I'm Allison Watson, founder and CEO of Modern Health. And just quick comments on Modern Health. We are a mental health platform for employers. So we partner with companies to make it easier for their employees to get access to mental health resources, whether that's therapy, coaching, evidence-based digital programs, group sessions, which we call circles, and a number of other different care modalities, all really to support folks' mental health across the spectrum from green to yellow to red. I believe that everyone has mental health, so we have one platform you can come solve your mental health needs. And when COVID hit, as you can imagine, demand for our services skyrocketed. All of a sudden, overnight, and just to give context, when COVID hit, we were about 40 employees, and now we're 400 employees. And so there was huge demand for our services. And so we really viewed this, or I viewed this as, okay, this is our big opportunity to help so many people, like our moment to seize this opportunity. And so I'll never forget this moment at All Hands. I kind of brought the team together and gave this rallying cry of like, this is our shot. This is our chance to help so many people. Like, this is our moment to go 110%. And a bunch of blank stares of like, yeah, we're excited, but hey, the pandemic's impacting all of us. We're all impacted. We've got kids at home without childcare. Like, we all of a sudden have our lives flipped upside down. We're taking care of sick ones, loved ones. And, that in that moment, I was like, we got this. We're here to help so many people. Like, this is our opportunity to help those people, and let's go 110%. And it's probably like 6 weeks later that I was sitting, I'll never forget this moment. I was sitting at my computer trying to write an email for like 45 minutes, like a 3-sentence email. And I had really, as a founder and CEO, I'm super motivated and inspired by the work that we do every day. I jump out of bed like an energized bunny and get super excited to just get to come to work every day and get the opportunity to work on this really important mission. And so there was always this kind of like shame or guilt associated with like burnt out, right? Like why should I feel burnt out? I have this amazing opportunity ahead of me, ahead of the team. Like I shouldn't be feeling burnt out. There's other people in the world that are struggling so much more than we are. But I felt it. I could not get through this email. And so I just shut my computer and went for a run to clear my head. And it was in that moment when I realized that rallying cry I had given weeks ago was not really appropriate for everyone. It wasn't relevant. Like, we often use the analogy internally, you need to put your own mask on like you can before you put it on the person next to you. And so in order for us to help all these people and support the demand that we're seeing from employers, we needed to take care of our own mental health, to take care of ourselves and our own employees. And so I came back and I wrote this long message on Slack to all of our employees saying, hey, I now get it that when I said 110%, like that's unrealistic. We're not going to be able to 110% constantly to support the demand that we're seeing. Like we need to take care of ourselves. And so that manifested itself in increasing our own mental health benefit, allowing for more flexible schedules, especially for parents. If someone needed to have their one-on-one with me at 7 p.m. after they put their kids down, like let's be flexible with that. And so it really was about understanding the world that we were living in, trying to, of course, it's going to be difficult to cater to every single person, but do our best to be as flexible as possible and really focus on prioritizing our own mental health so that we could support others. And that was a big learning experience for me as a first-time founder and CEO who, okay, moment, let's go 110%. And then realizing, okay, especially as a mental health company, we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to remind the audience that we would love to take your questions. And if you have questions, you should type them into the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen. You just click on the Q&A function and you can type in your question and we'll address them. We'll start addressing questions in the next few minutes. So I'm eager to talk about solutions, but before we jump to solutions and tools that you've implemented to help your colleagues and clients, I wanted to also talk a little bit about kind of the other pandemic we experienced in parallel with COVID, which is, that the pandemic really brought to the fore systemic racism and injustice in this country, highlighted by the vast disparities in those who died and bore a kind of a disproportionate burden of disease from the pandemic. In addition, there was a wave of violence against Asian Americans, protests against police brutality. How did the country's racial reckoning, additionally impact your teams emotionally and psychologically during this time? I think, again, maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Ojikutu.
Sure. I think that this is just, again, a really important question and something to really tease apart. We all have complex identities. I'm a woman, I'm a Black woman in healthcare, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter of, elderly parents. And we're all experiencing this differently. And I have to say that, I just think back to April of 2020. There was a news headline, Newsweek, and it said, 70% of those individuals who had died thus far from COVID-19 in Louisiana were Black. And yet Black people only comprise 33% of their population. And I remember thinking to myself, here we go again. Just because you think about the history of the country, the structural racism and the systemic inequity, and we immediately, a bunch of us got on the phone. This is, individuals, leaders, colleagues across the country. We're like, okay, so what do we do? It was sort of a sense of, again, this fatigue, because I laugh at it now, but it's not. I laugh more because it's a release of stress, because it's like here we have to put together interventions to deal with this, and yet we know we're headed into this pandemic. And everybody is sort of, getting ready for lockdown and all this sort of thing. So I think when you look at this issue of racial trauma, it really refers to the mental and emotional injury that occurs in any sort of, daily encounters, the microaggressions, the macroaggressions, the racial bias, the discrimination. But even if you don't have those encounters necessarily, irrespective of whether or not you experience that personally, racism is traumatic. It's all around us, and it hurts, and I think that's something that I don't know that everybody understands, unless you're in somebody's shoes who's experiencing it. And so it's the cumulative effect of racism on an individual's mental and physical health that can really just be detrimental. So everything I said about the workforce, and many of the people in my workforce here at the commission are identify as people of color. And that cumulative effect of being exhausted and anxious and, on edge in regards to COVID-19, and then seeing this disproportionate impact and all the things that were happening, and, the murder of George Floyd and the protests and just the life stress that came about in terms of racism, I think just compounded things, it really just brought it to the fore that we have to do something. So for us, acknowledging this was number one. And here in Boston, you all probably know that the mayor declared racism a public health crisis in June of 2020. So it's really been 2 years since that announcement was made. And really before then, at the commission, we've been doing a lot of work, social justice, equity, anti-racism, but that really brought it to the fore. So this is a city issue. This isn't just about, what's happening in one department, one institution. We're really talking about what's happening as a city. So since then, we've developed anti-racism policy. Racial justice is intentionally and explicitly included in all of our work. It's in all of our job descriptions. We have equity budgeting tools. We encourage identification of, discrimination. Reporting structures are in place to report them. We have anti-racism training. I'm working as a leader on creating a culture of belonging for all staff. And I think that is a challenge. You put in all these policies, you do all these trainings, but do people really feel like they belong here? I think that's a top-down sort of experience, a top-down intervention. And for me, I say with pride that I'm the first Black doctor to, be permanently in this position. And I've intentionally brought in a diverse group of individuals, to help run the commission. And I think that's been very important for people to see, but for them to also see a pathway to leadership here. It's not that you have to be stuck in any one place or, you don't have opportunities, but, we have an emerging leaders program that just got started. We have, all sorts of training and, certificate programs and ways for people to go back and get, degrees. And I think that none of this necessarily gets to the roots of structural racism, right? Because that's really deep and in many ways outside of any institution or any one individual's control. But it does acknowledge that we understand it's here and it's a problem, and we can all try our best to fix it.
Thank you. Dr. Brito, let me go to you next.
Sure, I completely agree with Basola, and I would just add that I think it's important for us to lead with those of us who have responsibility to lead organizations. It's important for us to do our work, our services, and meet with our community and lead and view the work through a lens of equity. That means, in my mind, that means, considering how individuals and communities experience things. And just as we talked about, that could be, mental health issues, connection, belonging, inclusivity, any of those things. It's really important for us to not leave any community behind. Think about how to lead through that lens of equity. And I think that also means asking the community what they need. So when we're trying to think about, how to provide services, how to meet people where they are, we've got to ask them. We've actually got to know whether or not we're accomplishing what we think we're accomplishing. Are we getting people what they need? Ask them, what do you need? Where is it that we're missing the mark? And I think it's just being open to where those inequities are and trying to rebalance those issues. I think is really, really important.
Thank you so much. Allison, do you want to talk a little bit about what your team experienced?
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with everything that's been said. I think the other thing that's worth calling out is really understanding how are able to show up every day at work and the role that employers can play, and having empathy to the fact that, you know, these events that have happened over the past couple of years, whether it's the pandemic-induced isolation, whether it's political unrest, whether it's ongoing racial injustice, this impacts people and how they show up at work every day, right? This has increased anxiety and depression around the world and disproportionately affected people of color. We've actually done a good amount of research at Modern Health. Research has shown that anxiety and depression has more than tripled in Black and Hispanic and Latinx communities after the murder of George Floyd. And actually, we did research with Forrester Consulting and found that 38% of managers and 31% said these events were so distracting they couldn't do their job. So I think employers can actually play a pretty big role here, and having empathy to that and understanding what role can they play in supporting people and how they show up at work and giving them the support that they need, not only to work through these traumatic events, but being able to show up to work and feel like that's a safe space. I also think it's pretty interesting that working in this remote work has actually, the idea of coming back to the office has added a layer of anxiety and fear of microaggressions returning when they go back into the office, especially with people of color. Black workers, actually, their sense of belonging during the pandemic doubled, and 64% said they're better at managing stress while working from home. So is this helpful information for us to understand employers allowing flexibility to work from home, or is that a Band-Aid approach? Should we be fixing what's actually causing this type of microaggression and this type of anxiety for returning to the office? So I think even just starting with employers having conversations, over 160 million Americans are employed by an employer. So just think about the role that employers can play within the United States of creating a more inclusive, supportive culture and helping with progressions and helping reduce the stress and anxiety of returning to work versus just having some of these Band-Aid approaches. And so I think first and foremost, what we can do within Modern Health on the services we offer, which we're super motivated and excited by, is supporting folks by creating super relevant and culturally sensitive care, right? Knowing that someone who connects with a white or Black therapist might have a very different experience and might want a different type of person with a different background. And so making sure that we have a diverse network that can really cater to the individual, what's going on in their life, what their background is, and actually having that be core to the type of care that's delivered through our platform. And so that's been something that we've been focusing on internally is, okay, what we play versus that we as Modern Health offer. That really comes from having a super diverse, not only network of providers, but also in the different care modalities, the type of care that's actually delivered. Some people might not feel comfortable seeing a therapist yet or talking about these things. They might not be ready for that. So maybe they're ready to just sit in a group session, which we call circles, and attend and be part of the healing session and hear what other people are struggling with that feels and resonates with what they're going through, but they're not yet ready to talk to someone. I think it's just being really open and honest about these things that are impacting people every single day, and impacts every single day how they show up to work and how they're able to, show up and be productive and give them the support that they need, and how important it is for employers to take a stand and knowing that they can play such a huge role in actually paving the way for a brighter future.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think now we can move on to talking about some of the tools and changes we've implemented to address some of these really challenging issues. Maybe this time I'll start with Dr. Brito. What are some of the changes you've made at Brown to kind of help your colleagues or your students during this period?
Right, thank you. So yeah, one of the really interesting ideas has come out of sort of our HR area. It was very clear to the university, particularly, once we sort of pivoted to the virtual environment and were sort of there for a couple of years, that people were working tirelessly to really enable students to continue to meet their academic aspirations. And some of the work was student facing. Certainly, Campus Life, for example, is very much, directly involved in students' lives. Some of the work was behind the scenes in terms of supporting infrastructure, et cetera. But everyone worked consistently and tirelessly over that period of time. And people were just exhausted. And so I think it was very important for the president and for senior administration to acknowledge that and one of the things that they did was to charge our HR area with really going out into the workplace, into the employee environment, and asking people not only how do you feel, but what do you need? Again, sort of gets back to the question that or series of questions that I mentioned earlier. And what came through was the fact that people needed time. People really needed space and time to restore themselves. They needed to be rejuvenated, to find ways to connect with the things that they need, the things that their families needed, and just really, and that still is the case. And so that was really, really important. And so in order to really meet that need and that desire, the president really took a page from the corporate world and just said, how can we give people time? Time that doesn't feel like, okay, we're just going to send everybody home and you're going to continue to work at home. And the idea was to sort of power down the entire institution. And so that message did need to go from the top down to say, our expectation is that everyone is going to go, whether it's home or wherever you need to be, to restore yourself, to have some time, to have some space to just do the things that bring you joy, bring you restoration. And we don't want people emailing each other. We don't want people tasking colleagues with things that can be done at another time. Just really power down the institution, and that signal really cascaded down to everyone. It was incredibly helpful. People really felt valued, they felt heard, they felt acknowledged, and came back restored. And so those happened at 2 different times so that, you know, the entire workforce could take advantage of it. And it's been brought back so that it's happening on a recurrent basis. So it feels institutionalized. It feels like it's a gesture to, again, the need for the community to be supported and feel valued and acknowledged. So to have that sense of rejuvenation has just been really incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Allison, do you want to go next?
Yeah. I think there's a couple things that to just better support our employees. First and foremost is investing in mental health resource. So that's everything from our own mental health benefit for our own employees, right? Really practicing what we preach. Offering mental health days where the whole company can just shut down, because oftentimes when you take time off and the rest of the team is working, it's really hard to disconnect. So we're doing a mental health week, the week of July 4th, where we're just shutting down the company for an entire week and giving that time for people to really disconnect. We also invested in increasing our childcare stipends for working parents who, you know, for a while there with daycares, everything closed, and having kids home without childcare. And so that's something that we've continued to invest in, even with things opening back up. We started a wellness stipend so that people could better take care of themselves in this remote work, and just being more flexible with schedules, which I think has naturally lent itself to working in this world. So we have switched to somewhat of a fully remote. It's a bit of a hybrid, but we are fully remote now. We're fully distributed. We no longer have a headquarters per se. We have WeWork offices that people can go into to get that connection. But instead we're doing to bring people together in a very intentional way. So we're doing our first company-wide offsite this September with 400 people, which is very exciting. We haven't gotten the team together since we were about 40 employees. And in addition to that, we're having teams and departments kind of get together on a quarterly basis. I still think that human connection is really, really important to people. While working remotely allows for a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of benefits, I think getting people together in person, I think people are really, in this world where there's an epidemic of loneliness, are really craving that human connection where they can be in front of each other and really connect in a way that's honestly hard to do over Zoom. So I think that opportunity to get together in person is really important, and that we're focused on as well.
Thank you. Dr. Jakutu, I imagine that it's very hard for your staff to just step away, since your doctors and public health experts at a public health agency. I can't even imagine how you can give yourselves breaks during this time, but tell us, what kinds of tools have you implemented?
So yes, this has been an ongoing challenge. Certainly, we started with similar process to what Vanessa mentioned, asking people what they wanted, and certainly time, was number one on the list, including increased compensation, but that's a sort of separate issue that we're working on. So time is a challenge when you're dealing with direct service providers. I mean, we run the largest homeless shelter in the city. It's EMS, where we have nurses and obviously, doctors and other people who can't. We've had challenges in sorting out how people can truly power down, for enough time to really rejuvenate. But the other things that came up on the list of desires, and this is all, I think, a work in progress, is that people wanted time to reflect. And what I mean by that is time to talk to each other about what they were experiencing. And I think part of that is just this, meeting after meeting after meeting on Zoom, and people not feeling like they're connecting. So what we did was we established what we call reflection rounds. And initially those rounds were focused in on, coping with illness, because a lot of folks had people who they were caregivers for who were ill. And certainly that was something that people wanted to talk about. Then it sort of became an opportunity for people to just talk about world events, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Buffalo and Uvalde. What were the experiences when you dropped your child off at school the day after? Caregiving for folks who, living with dementia. I mean, it really has just gone beyond that, where it's a support group, for the most part, but it's facilitated by folks who have, the training, the experience, licensed social workers who are able to, do the moderation of that in an appropriate way. So it's not, causing triggers for other people. So that's something that has been very popular. And I think it's something that we will continue. In addition, interestingly, people asked for training. And, I was like, well, that's interesting. What is it that people want to be trained in? So one of the things that people wanted better understanding of is how to do some self-healing and build their emotional wellness and resilience, and how to even be trainers for other folks, because we have such a large, organization. So we instituted a program called STARS. It's called support. That stands for support and training for aware and resilient staff. And it's, several weeks where people go through, short bursts of training on how to, enhance their own emotional wellness. And I think that's been very, very popular. In addition, people asked for mental health first aid training. In dealing with other coworkers and seeing as a supervisor, things are not going well with, this individual. What do I do? What resources do I have at my disposal to offer? Just like one would learn CPR, so those are things that were asked for and we provided. So we have offered an 8-week program in mental health first aid. In addition, like my colleagues have already spoken about, we have enhanced our wellness programming. So we offer a number of outlets, including arts and crafts, lunch and learn, Tai Chi, meditation classes, all of which I think a certain group of people participate in. We need to figure out what other people, are looking for, because that, again, it's about what people want and meeting people where they're at. We did hire a full-time dependent care manager. So this person is working on developing childcare services, as well as not just for children, but for elderly, parents, other people that people are caring for. So to provide resources, funding, referrals for services. And then interestingly, I say this is interesting, but it's probably not that unique for other sectors, but within city government, we've moved to a hybrid teleworking program, which right now it's a pilot. It's a 6-month pilot. I think we're on month 5 now. It's going very well. That isn't something typical, as you all probably know, of government in terms of allowing people to telework outside of emergency situations, but it's something that people really desired. And I think that it has enhanced people's mental health. And on top of that, it's giving people choice, because they can choose which day. If it's 2 days in a row you need, take your 2 days in a row to work from home. If it's best that it's Thursday and Friday, or Friday and Monday, and you're not even working here, directly in the city, you have somewhere else you're working. We don't ask questions, we allow people the choice. And I think that's something that's oftentimes missing within our sector. So giving people those options, I think has been really important.
Okay, that sounds great. It's so interesting. And I'm actually taking a lot away from that too. I wanted to also just ask you just a personal question. As women leaders, I'm just curious about how the last 2 years have impacted you emotionally and psychologically, and what steps you've done to to take better care of yourselves and to kind of rebalance work and private life during this time. Maybe Dr. Ojikudu, I'll stick with you since you were just talking.
Sure, sure. I think sometimes as women leaders, and maybe we put this pressure on ourselves, but I certainly think society does too, that we're supposed to be stoic, we're supposed to be unemotional, because that demonstrates that we are able to, actually lead, because whatever the stereotype is about how women lead, it's something that I think I've watched other mentors of mine sort of embody, this stoicism. And I found that it really separates you from people. And people just don't see you as somebody who's empathetic and sort of bringing their full self to the table. So what I've tried to do, and I would have to ask my staff if I'm good at it, is just acknowledging when I'm under stress, the stress that I hold within and tend to hold, we all hold it in our shoulders, and talking about it more and letting my guard down with my leadership team and modeling that behavior so that people can feel vulnerability and express vulnerability at work. This has been a pandemic of loss. When I first was sort of a frontline provider, I remember walking out of the hospital late one night with one of my colleagues, and neither one of us just knew what to say to each other. It was just, usually we talk and chat and blah, blah, blah. And it was just, kind of silence, just because there's been so much that we saw during our shift, the period of time that we were at the hospital. And I think similarly in public health, it's like this constant motion, a constant being on and having to be right about everything, and everything you're wrong about is just so dire, or it feels so dire. And so acknowledging that and talking about it with my colleagues, with folks here at work, and even in our leadership team meetings, our program directors meeting, just talking about the stress that we're under. For me, that's been helpful.
Great. Allison, you already shared a little bit about the impact on you, but what else would you like to share about?
Yeah, no, I really agree with what's been said. I think also there's this expectation. I mean, look, the reality is there's less women in leadership, there's less people of color in leadership, there's less minorities in leadership. And so I think there's this expectation when people do get in these leadership roles to be perfect. But the reality is there's less role models to and there's less of some, of folks who have paved the way in certain areas. And so I think that leading with vulnerability is really important, and also knowing it's okay to not be perfect. I think especially as women leaders, as Visol mentioned, there's this expectation to be a certain way and to fit in a certain, because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to be successful as a female leader. And I think for me personally, I'm a first-time founder, first-time CEO. I really have no choice but to be vulnerable with my team and ask for help and not be afraid to call on others for help. I certainly wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the incredible team that I have supporting me, and an amazing team of leaders and executives that I can rely on, who are 1,000% at their job than I would ever be at their job. And so I think it's just really being open and honest and not being afraid to be vulnerable and to be authentic and get to work and be genuine. At the end of the day, I think that's how you can really lead, and can lead by being genuine and authentic and being themselves. Any role, you don't have to be in an executive role or a leadership role to do that. You can be in any role at any company and have the confidence and ability to up and be authentic and be genuine, and that can go a long way. I think I've been very fortunate that I've, as a leader of a mental health company, I've definitely taken the time to prioritize my own mental health. I, again, would not be here today if it wasn't for my therapist, my executive coach, my couples therapist. I invest a lot into my own mental health, and I'm incredibly fortunate I've got access to those resources, because I know that I wouldn't be able to lead or be nearly as productive as I am today without that type of support system. Outside of that, some simple things that I try to do, meditation has changed my life. I really do try to meditate almost every single day for about 20 minutes. And as that it's completely changed my life. So for those out there who maybe don't have access to mental health resources like therapy or coaching, just breathing exercise and sitting in silence with yourself, even your thoughts, for a few minutes every single day can really play a role in helping with stress and anxiety. And outside of that, I think it's just connecting with others, taking the time to connect with friends, family, loved ones. I personally crave that human connection of being able to be vulnerable in front of others. And I think that's something that I personally miss in this remote world.
Great. Dr. Brito, how has this affected you personally, and what are some of the tools you've used?
I would agree with both of my colleagues. Pretty much everything that they've shared has been my experience as well. I also appreciate having a really wonderful staff and feel a great deal of pride in the relationships that we've built and maintained during this time. And I've certainly leaned on them and have really appreciated their support. I hope that I've also provided a space for them as well, which also I think is affirming to know that, you know, your team feels some support as well. And so that's been really helpful. I've also found that during this time, I've really taken advantage of this idea that we can connect remotely with people. And even though it's been part of my work life, it's also been a way for me to connect with friends and family who are in other parts of the world that I hadn't really thought to communicate with in the same way. And so, you know, just having, I have a friend in Michigan, and we have coffee twice a month on a Saturday morning over Zoom. We hadn't really thought to do it in that way, and we love it. We really look forward to, you know, to meetings. So that's a small example, but I also feel, you know, the social connections have been incredibly important to maintain with family and friends. I think that for me, I try to get regular exercise and, you know, to get plenty of rest. That's always a challenge, you know, because there's always more work to do, but to really force myself to power down so that I can get my own rest and be able to think clearly and be able to have energy to be able to do the things that I need and want to do. I also have a pretty strong prayer life, and I rely on that very heavily. I think that's been important for me. It brings me clarity and a sense of groundedness, which has been extraordinarily helpful for me. So I would say those are the things that I have really relied on and expect that I'll continue to rely on for the foreseeable future.
Thank you so much. So we're getting some terrific questions from our audience. So let me start taking some of their questions. This one is for Dr. Brito, but really any of you, each of you should feel free to jump in. Dr. Simona is asking, Dr. Brito, please expand on the topic of how teenagers are struggling to adjust. Are there higher incidents of drinking and drug use? What practices can parents support to help our children?
Yes, so it's been a challenge. So yes, you know, developmentally, I'll speak to the time frame between 18 and 24, which is the group of people that I work with most. There's so much churning and questioning, you know, experimentation, exploration. It's that time in our lives when we really want to just try to figure out who we are. And the time has been so distorted, and there's just been so much that has walled us off from the things that we would use to kind of modulate some of those things. You know, where there's a lot of sort of focus on social media and, you know, TikTok and, you know, comparison and thinking about other people's experiences as opposed to focusing on the things that you know, the individual student or groups of young people need. And so, yes, there definitely has been, you know, a lot of difficulty with students and young people who have been struggling with mental health issues. There's no question. And some of it, as I said, I think is you know, superimposed on what's sort of normal in terms of what's going on in people's lives right now. And so, you know, being in communication, talking with students, talking with young people, understanding how to give them some things that kind of balance out the experimentation with with things that are not necessarily healthy or helpful ways of adapting, but giving them constructive ways to adapt. I think those things have been really important for us. Our counseling service has been really quite busy. And again, we have worked very hard to engage community partners so that not all of the work necessarily is focused on the one-on-one therapeutic counseling relationship, but engaging other people, in this case, students, to be peer educators. We've really invested a lot in developing our peer education network because we know that students and young people learn best from each other. So giving them the tools, accurate information, healthy and helpful ways to adapt to changes in their lives. I think those things have been really very helpful. We have in our particular case, we have a brand new living learning environment that's focused on wellness. And it's not the only place where wellness happens, if there is such a thing, but we want it to be an incubator of ideas, of ways in which students can and young people can talk with each other and help each other reimagine what health and wellness might look like. So sometimes it's, getting together and having a dance party, an anime dance party. There was an activity that happened on the green the other day where they just sort of pulled out a screen and turned up some speakers and students just got out and had fun. They're, finding ways to cook together, healthy ways to eat. We have found students have enjoyed doing crafts together. They have enjoyed doing Tai Chi and yoga and lots of physical things together. So building community, finding ways to connect, staying in communication and giving them tools to help with those things, I think has been really helpful.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to jump in on ways that parents can help their teens? If not, that's okay too. Okay. Maggie is asking, with so many companies nervous to talk about and address racial issues, how is one able to tell how much an employee is impacted by everything that's going on? So do you have any advice for reaching out to employees of color sensitively to kind of find out what more they might need from the company or from you?
If I could jump in, just because I think that this is something we've been trying to do. One of the things that we started and will continue to do on a regular basis is, we've talked a little bit about this, surveying people. And I do think that that's an important piece of this without becoming necessarily personal. You can glean a lot from people's responses. So one of the things we did recently is that we updated our organizational values. And now every organization has their principles, their values, their mission statement. What we were trying to do here is get a sense of what people thought was missing from what it was that we were saying previously about our principles, our goals, what it is sort of our mission is. And so we did a survey, and I think a reasonable number of people participated. And what we found was that a lot of people in their sort of qualitative responses said, we talk about anti-racism, we talk about what we're doing externally, but we're just not doing enough internally, and I feel that we need to do more work in seriously addressing institutional racism and the feeling that I have that, people are experiencing microaggressions. And so this is what sort of led us down the road of the anti-racism training and really getting people to understand what microaggressions are, feeling what it feels like to be in somebody else's shoes when they're hearing certain things, And so I think that is a big part of it, is just asking people, but doing so in a way that doesn't necessarily make people, feel as though you are, becoming too personal necessarily. And not everybody wants to talk about their specific experiences, but just asking them in general. And I think the other thing too is just making it clear that these issues are important to you. Therefore, people will start to talk about them. When I started in this role, I intentionally had these office hours that I would block off. Maybe it was an hour every week, and each person could sign up for like 20 minutes or so. And inevitably, in those office hours, staff members would talk about some of their personal experiences, and many of those personal experiences did relate to racism and discrimination, as well as sexism, as well as issues like, well, why are we not focusing in on LGBTQIA plus populations here? Why don't we have a program about that? Because we don't, and we've been working on that because that's been an issue. So I think just having a culture of openness, where people feel like they can express themselves, has been really important. And I think it's hard to develop, but I think it's important for organizations to have, particularly in the context of the world we're currently living in.
I'd like to also just add to that, if you don't mind. There has been a really wonderful initiative here at Brown, and it is fondly known as our DAP, our Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan. And every single department, no matter how large or how small, is responsible for having a DIAP. And that is part of institutionalizing and diffusing the responsibility so that everyone has a part to play and plays that part. And every department is then accountable for whatever their action plan is and actually meeting the metrics that they've set out for themselves. So in it may touch on hiring, it may touch on retention, it may touch on education, it may touch on any number of areas, any number of domains within sort of the breadth of diversity and inclusion. But it's the most important piece of this, I think, is the action. And the fact that it's something that each department has a responsibility for, and there is accountability that's maintained at the highest level for this.
Great. One questioner wanted to see if they could get any more details about the childcare and mental health care stipends. Allison, you mentioned those. Can you talk a little bit, just give a few more details about what those entailed?
Yeah, totally. So on the mental health side, offering resources and paying for them for employees, whether it's therapy, coaching. So the way that Modern Health works, and we offer Modern Health to our own employees, is we partner with an employer and they'll determine a certain number of visits that they'll cover for them. So that can be anywhere from 8 to 20 therapy sessions per year, completely covered for the employee. And then once an employee hits the max number of sessions, there'll be some sort of cost sharing like they typically do their medical plan. So it makes it, it lowers the barrier to entry to getting support for people. So that's on the mental health side. Is as we think about a mental health stipend, it's really to get support for their mental health. And on the care side, that's getting reimbursed for childcare services, which are incredibly expensive. So that's an area that we've really invested in. We offer really rich benefit to our employees, and the way that it works. Employees can basically get reimbursed up to a certain amount on a quarterly basis for childcare services, whether that's nanny services, whether that's daycare, and we offer that as a benefit to every single one of our employees.
That's great. Did anyone else talk about these benefits? No, that's okay. Okay, one more question is, Shirley is mentioning the rollout of the 988 National Suicide Prevention Hotline in July with text capacity. And she's just wondering if any of you have opinions about how helpful that hotline might be. Maybe Dr. Jakutu, have you engaged at all with that hotline yet? No.
I have not, but I do think that people should feel like there's support available to them. I think the question is always, the quality of, the services that are provided, the person who's, answering the phone, the training that they've received. And I honestly don't know enough about it to comment in any sort of robust way.
And I just a comment as well. I think, look, having a hotline available so that people who are in crisis can get the support they need is obviously, incredibly impactful and can play a huge role. But I think just coming back to the root issue here and actually driving change at the systemic level, I think, look, mental health issues are skyrocketing, and especially among adolescents, right? Suicide's the leading cause of death for kids between the ages of 14, which is just horrific to think about. And so what can we do to better support these so they're not increasing dramatically, but decreasing? And of course, we want to have hotlines available to folks, but I think more about what we do as a society to really get at the root cause of these issues and why we're seeing these metrics so drastically. I think social media plays a huge role. You know, the time that we all spend tethered to technology, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, our email, right? The way that we live and work is so different, and has changed rapidly over the past couple of years, let alone the past couple of decades. Yet we as humans are pretty much the same as we did tens, 50, hundreds of years ago. So just think about the rate that technology has advanced and civilization has progressed. I often say we as humans are like a V1 operating system in a V1000 world. And then how can we expect adolescents who are living through such a different life in such a different world in such a different built environment? How can we give them tools to be resilient? So I think, of course, having access to a crisis hotline can be incredibly cool, but what can we better do to support what's causing these issues and what's really driving this dramatic, this exponential increase in mental health issues among adolescents?
That's great. Well, unfortunately, we're just about at the end of our time, but I really want to thank each of you so much for taking the time to be with us and so generously sharing your personal and professional experiences with me and with the audience. And I'd like to thank Tufts for sponsoring this event. And we're going to go back to Dr. Werner of Tufts now for closing remarks. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of Tufts Medicine and the Boston Globe, thank you for participating in today's webinar, Women Leaders in Healthcare, Taking Care of Patients, Employees, and Yourself. We hope you discovered some strategies that will help you in your day-to-day juggle between work and home, patients and family. Working in healthcare is not easy. Please remember that the work you do is so meaningful and important to our community. Please stay healthy physically and mentally. Thanks again for watching.